Welcome to the March edition of AHSA Queensland. Any comments to come from the floor? One thing I think on people's mind is the Avalon Air Show. How many here went to it? 4, 5? 5 from here. And who had trouble getting into and or out of the place? I got to admit I didn't. I went there early enough, it would seem, on an early train out there, and I got on the bus to the airport first thing. But gee whiz, I got out, I went on the Friday, and the air show went on in the evening, as some of you would know, some not. And I decided to go. I thought I was nearly going to finish. There's going to be a big crush getting out of here. And I got a bus to the train station, and but on the way going to the station, there were queues of cars trying to get onto the road, and they're coming in from our left, so we were the right away. And I thought, these cars are not going to move with the constant stream of traffic going the road I was on. And a lot of talk has been told about the difficulty getting to and from the place. Peter Dunn, you made a mention of it yourself.
Yeah, I had a lot of trouble. On the Saturday, I left at 6:45, and we caught lots of traffic
To get out.
To get there.
To get there, yes.
And then after the Raptor display, which was about 3:30 p.m. on the Saturday, we thought we'd leave, and everyone had the same idea. And it was absolute bedlam. We got on the exit row to go out, and we just didn't move at all for ages. So we tried another tactic. We then drove up and down the rows looking for gaps where cars had left, and drove through to the next row, drove up and back till we found another gap and went to the next row, and we got all the way to the front, and then got back in the exit lane and got out. So that's pretty much what it was.
Peter and I, first Friday, we hit the one that started getting in and out. But then we drove to Lethbridge and got the pilot's bus in there, and it took a different route to the aerodrome, and it took you right to the gate. Yeah. So that was the best one.
Right. All you people out there in Zoom land, do you have some comments you'd like to come up with?
It's Graham Aspinall, Warwick. I didn't have any problems at all. I stayed at a B&B at Geelong and just got the train to Alara and the shuttle bus, to Avalon and vice versa. I left. I think the train left Avalon South Station at 7:30. I was at the main gate by 8 o'clock, and getting home was a breeze. So I can only comment on the mode of transport I chose. It was really good, but I did hear throughout the weekend the traffic snarls on the road were horrendous.
Yeah. What day was that for you?
I went Saturday and Sunday.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I didn't go this year, but every time I go, I've done it by train and bus and had no problems. I was there on the first year when they'd undercated for the car parking and for the toilets. That's the Saturday. Overnight, they pulled down a lot of fencing to increase access to the car parking, and they'd scoured every farm that has portable toilets and trailed them to Melbourne overnight.
Well, that's good.
There'll be an article for this in the next issue of Downwind, and I've got quite a bit of information, and it'll have a map as well to explain what was going on.
Yep.
And the main problem, one main problem was that after about 10 o'clock in the morning on both Saturday and Sunday, the buses were taking an hour and a quarter to get from Lara to the front entrance.
Oh,
and therefore they were not getting back in time for a 10-minute interval between trains. So there's a crowd of people at the Lara station sitting there waiting for 1 or 2 buses to come along every now and then.
Was it free parking? I assume did that cause the log jam? Was it free parking in the past? I've just got no idea.
No, you had to pay in the past.
In the past,
first time it was free, and also the first time free for children as well.
Right. So that would have swelled the general public numbers, yeah.
There was a record number of tickets sold because they had to buy the tickets online before the day, and they were sold out before Saturday.
Saturday sold out.
Both days.
And Sunday.
Yeah,
Oh
so
well. I hope they've learned from it.
good in some ways. But they do it again in a couple of years' time. They'll have to really put their thinking caps on about it. When I arrived at the Lara station in the train, I hopped out and went down to the bus. And they said, where's your bus ticket? I said, oh, it's included, it's free. And a lot of people around me were saying the same thing. We understood the bus was free. Yeah, I could afford the $10, but it's the principal thing. A lot of us were then sent back up to the station to get a bus ticket to get.
It was $10.
Yeah. But when I bought my very expensive ticket to go to the place, it said it included the bus.
The actual $10 actually included, if you left, I left at Ormond, one of the outer suburbs, that was included in the $10 as well. So it's $10 covered your domestic travel into Southern Cross Station, and then your train, and then your bus covered.
Right. I used a Mickey, whatever they call them, Mikey card for the main trains. Anyway, speaking of air shows, some of you will have heard, some of you know, maybe you don't. There's going to be a Pacific Air Show at the Gold Coast on the 18th to 21st of August. We've sent it on Surface Paradise. I haven't seen anything else about it really. There's very little publicity about it yet. So I don't know exactly where you're going to
get some reasonably cheap accommodation.
Yes.
It's oceanfront, looking at the beach. It's a mere $1,600 a night.
I imagine it'll be the way it'll be too. Yeah. So I hope that they can come up with some way getting a lot of people down to the Gold Coast and places that they can see it.
That's going to be the problem.
And they're going to charge for it. So I don't know how they're going to charge people to stand around the front of the beach. We will.
Ticket only under the beach,
Mhm.
right? So I've got tickets already, but the ticket covers you to get through the gate onto the beach.
Right.
What you do after that, but it's a restricted number on the beach.
Mhm.
You're allowed a chair each, but no umbrellas.
When's that in? In May, is it?
August.
Right.
Approach from the wall.
I'll shoot you now.
Yeah, it's. I'm not sure the problems are going to be, first of all, getting there, and secondly, if you take a car, what the hell are you going to do with it?
Yeah, yeah.
The other problem will be everyone will think the same way. So if you get on a train, you may have to stand in somebody's backpack or
Yeah.
sit on their lap.
And the
or
train, of
something.
course,
Yeah.
doesn't go all the way to Surface Paradise.
No, you've got to get out and get on the light rail.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I hope they've got lots of extra light rail cars to run.
No.
Next meeting in April, we're going to have a speaker, John Minns. And his subject will be a short history of air navigation. For May, Ian Campbell. And his subject will be aircraft flown by Air Vice Marshal Don Bennett from July 1930 to September 1939. And Don Bennett, of course, did a lot of work with the flight pathfinders. And for a long time until he died, he was the patron of Queensland Air Museum. And for June, Darryl Purdom, one of our members, we'll be talking about the Victor bomber falls 30,000 feet. We'll be interested to see what Darryl has to say about that.
Okay.
So I'm ready now to hand over to Ian to tell us about the Cherokee Sixes and how a lovely aeroplane they were.
There's some variation in opinion there.
I'll give you the other one.
Which one works better? Does that work all right?
Yep.
I tend to talk a bit loud anyway, so if I do, bad luck. Okay, you can see the title there. This is about the Cherokee Sixes right through in Australia, about their accident record, and I'll explain that as we get somewhere. To start with, this is what you see in the press and on the TV and all that. A plane crashes, and of course you get that brilliant journalistic, so well-researched history saying what happened, and of course it's never even close to. They're lucky actually guess the type of aircraft that crashed. Now you're all aware of that, but it's more important when we look at an accident history to just eliminate all that stuff that you've ever heard of or read and try and find facts. The background of this, I do a lot of scanning for Tony's Australian Air data, putting aircraft photos in there to try and complete the records to make them useful. What you see is you pick up trends very, very quickly. Some of you might have seen a bit I did about Victor Air Tourers when they had a lot of accidents with them in the early days. And when you start researching it, you find out, well, the other one that came up big time in terms of being statistically all wrong was the Cherokee Sixes. The trend's very obvious. The data on that, there's massive amounts of data out there. The trick is to find out what's real data and what's just best guess. AAD, Tony's site, is some very, very good data source and very easy to search. AHSA, There's a lot of data there. Easy to search. I wouldn't really necessarily agree with that. And it's not complete. Biggest variables, interpretation, understanding what you can rely on, what you can't rely on. The Cherokee 6, let's go back one step. What is the Cherokee 6 series? There are two basic types of Cherokee 6s built, the fixed undercarriage version and the retractable undercarriage version that came later. Two engine sizes, 260 and 300 horsepower, 11 sub-variants of the fixed gear model that started in 1966 and finished into the mid-80s. 6 sub-variants of the retractables that went through from 76 to the early 2000s. A total, there's the total, 4,420 fixed, 3,422 retractables built in that period. And out of that, 163 fixed, 126 retractables came to Australia. Okay. All around the world, the Cherokee 6 was a very readily accepted aircraft. It fitted into a market that there are other aircraft there, but not like the Cherokee 6. First thing, it had pretty good performance. Even the 260 was sprightly enough. The 300 had a little bit of extra poke. Load carrying capacity, over reasonable range, better fuel economy and price than just, in fact, anything else that was available at the time. And they're advertising in America, and I was stunned to see this, advertises that you could fit a full-size coffin in it with the pilot. Now, that's an interesting way of marketing an aircraft. Yeah, oh no, the pilot couldn't sit in the coffin, but no, that wasn't allowed. So in Australia, it found RFDS, the Royal Flying Doctor, took to it like a duck to water. Third level airlines, charters, and country and farm operators particularly love them because of the load carrying capacity. We'll come back to that in a while. Regarded in generally as a relatively sound, a relatively easy to fly, but with care needed in weight and balance and extreme care with fuel selection. We'll come back to that one. Okay. This is the statistic that I started with. 163 fixed gears in Australia, 42 destroyed in accidents, but there was 3 more than that that got wiped out in Cyclone Tracy. We can't blame anybody except for the Mother Nature. Of the retractables, 126, 26 are destroyed. So if you look at it, 26% for the fixed gear, 21% for the retractables. Not a great deal of difference, but a significant difference. Victor losses, 40%, industry averages 5 to 15. So statistically, a long way over anything else. Okay, go back about now researching accidents. I have a postgraduate in this sort of stuff. That doesn't mean I know a lot, it means I've been to a lot of courses. But when you're doing those things, there are different ways of examining accidents. And they all involve the accident, starting at the accident, working both ways from it. Depends on what you're trying to find out. If you're only trying to find out what went wrong, you just go back in time and put in a timeline and all the different events. And there's things that are called root cause analysis, there's things called time event analysis, blah, blah, blah. And there's a bow tie, that's where you're looking to improve it later on. Now, we don't do that very good in our accident investigations in Australia, despite what AHSA claim. Their accident investigations in terms of prevention are rubbish. If I tried to do that in what they do here in my mining career, I wouldn't have a job. So, told you all this stuff there. Search engines, amazing. If you put in a search engine for a particular plane having a particular accident day, you'll either find nothing or a truckload. And that's what makes it hard to put together a proper analysis. Quantity of records, the quantity is poor because a lot of them were lost over time, and that's a conversion from DCA to CARSA to God knows what other names it had. A lot of them were in physical forms that were never actually ever scanned, thrown out in the rubbish tip, burnt, whatever. Lack of digitisation. And the other one is, massive number of these things were actually never investigated. And that took a bit of digging into, and it will surprise you. Where the accident happened is the first thing that they look at before they decide on investigating. If it's going to cost too much money to go there and investigate it, it doesn't get investigated unless it's a multiple fatality. Now, I don't know if you've seen only in the last couple of months, where CAHSA have said they're not really going to do too much light aircraft investigation, and RAOS has said the same thing. The reason behind it? No, it's not cost, just for the first time ever. It's because we've read too many lawyers. And they're afraid if they say something about the pilot or something about the plane, they'll get sued. So the solution is don't investigate. There you go. And the other thing that comes up is confusion in terms, particularly with CAHSA, and Tony gets it in translating it into his database. You have a thing that's called crashed, which normally you would think is pretty obvious. There's a thing called damaged or damage beyond repair, which covers a multitude of sins. And there's the not recorded at all. It just plane has been taken off the records with no explanation whatsoever. When you start digging, you find a photo of a Cherokee 6 that's in bits no bigger than a 2-bob piece. And it says there, either damaged or no record or withdrawn from service. Yeah, definitely withdrawn from service. So all this makes it very difficult to come to conclusions. So what I did for each one that I could get records on is find out, depending on how complete the event record is, could I work out what happened and the timeline that led up to it? Then have a look, lead up and aftermath, and are those things relevant? Well, sometimes they're not even relevant. What did the initial and subsequent investigations by other sources show? And particularly, could I relate to them as being actual fact or not? And I'll explain that a little bit in a while. Aerial, look at things like pilot in charge, experience on type, all those things there, loading if possible. Area of operations, the strip conditions, weather conditions. Did the weather have a relevance? Which I know you'll be amazed to know that the weather actually has a lot of relevance in aircraft crashes. I know you'd be stunned by that. Statistically, right? There's the breakdown for all those major subtypes. You see the first group there are the non-retractables. The ones with R in them are retractables. So there's a breakdown, and notice this spread of percentages. There's the thing. So you got the 260. 45%, 300, 27. The 301, which is a variant with some modifications, and the 301R is retractable, T's turbo, RT3, it must have 2 turbos on that one. I don't know why it's an RT300T, but that's what they call it. Oh, Tito. Yeah, good one. Now, you know, I never picked that up. Duh. But you'll notice suddenly, these are such low numbers, it's a bit hard to really relate to that. But that difference, right, and to that is what's different. So what we look at is why that drops to that. And we go into that in a bit later. But you see damage written off. These are the crash written off. Damage written off is where there's some high, extreme amount of doubt about what damage written off actually means. It means it could have been a storm, tempest, hail, something, or it could have been someone was lying about what happened. And that's where if you've got photos, you can work out pretty easily what it was all about. A burnt out wreck doesn't normally indicate that lightning hit it, because that would be exceptional, especially when it's on the end of the strip, like it just landed. Yeah. By the way, I meant to say, the actual full presentation on this is too big to send, but if anybody actually wants it, if you personally email me, I will send you a memory stick with the whole thing in it with all the data set behind it, if you really need to be bored that much. Okay. 23 records for, now, I only looked at the 300 horsepower fixed undercarriage model because there's too much data there to go in for this purpose. Only records for 23 of the 41 write-offs. Why? I mentioned before, they're either not available, they've lost, never digitised, or never investigated. DCA used to have a habit of telephoning, if anybody in the old days ever had the telephone call, what happened, why did it happen, and that's all they wrote down, unless they really wanted more. I had the occasion to have that wonderful interview once, but that's a different story. Okay. Here's some detail in here that comes out of this. 4 of these write-offs occurred in landings, and you'll see they landed long on a short strip, landed with a tailwind, or landed in a strip that was, when I say unsuitable, in fact, the strip had crosses on both ends of it. That kind of unsuitable. Right. 3 of them related to operating in non-VFR. 1 hit the terrain, 1 was attempting a landing in non-VFR, and 1 while flying in non-VFR ran out of fuel and hit the ground. You know, I mean, these are obviously aircraft, major defects in the aircraft to cause that. No. 3 related to fuel flow. Well, when I say 3, this is off the investigation. Right? This is where it says in the investigation, 3 were fuel flow problems. 1 undetermined, 1 poor tank management, and 1 on takeoff. But all of these are suggested fuel selection. In other words, they're saying that this looked like the problem we'll talk about in a minute about the fuel selectors, and almost certainly were. Right? Can we trigger on? Sorry if I'm rushing this, but there's just so much. I'm trying to get it down to a sensible time. If I'm going too fast, tell me to slow down. So 5 engine fail due undetermined causes, but all selected fuel flow. 7 not related operations at Cyclone Tracy, 3 fires and 1 storm. 1 broke up, probably exceeding VNE in poor weather, but they couldn't prove it. Eh? Yeah. Right. 13 damage but repairs, only 9 have good reports. And when you look at those, 7 of them, again, are related to short, long landings, unserviceable strip, heavy engine fail, right? 2 things in this one. The aircraft was overloaded and the engine stopped anyway. And 1 landing in a crosswind. By the way, do you remember what the crosswind maximum for a PA-32? Yeah, this one landed at 35 knots, gusting 40, crosswind. Funny, it had a problem. Yeah, 2 airframe problems. And this is the one that you normally start looking at. Is there any commonalities? And in all of those accidents with the 300s, the only 2, 1 was a door latch that opening on landing. And of course, eh? It did. It's where the door opened. And that's exactly what happens. It's only going to pop open 2 inches. Well, this is the front one. Yeah. But the trouble is the pilot didn't know what was going on and panicked. Yeah. And the other word, a main gear bolt failed on landing and fell over. So again, these aren't what you say are typical faults of an aircraft that you'd be worried about. Now, I said I had a data set. That's one of about 25 pages. So every one of those PA-32s is listed, its whole full history, and its accident and incident history, including anything that's found from a report. Now, that's for every single one that's in Australia. There's a line or many, many lines. Where you see those gaps, that's because the same aircraft has many lines. So that's why they're not all here, because you can't read it for a start. But if you're interested, I can send you that whole database. Okay, big tickets. Now, this is little because it has to be. Fuel system. It's not overly complicated. It's a simple selector with 5 positions on it. This is in this fixed undercarriage 300, right? So you get off and then you go through the tanks. And you blokes who fly them would know that how well it is, right? Somewhat clumsy from a design perspective and requires special attention. Why? Because the detent, particularly going to the first step, over time it gets a bit worn and it can be hard to find. And I've tried this just to see on the older ones, and they do get worn, so much so that there's been 30 something, I can't remember, 33 or 35, something like that, actual issues out from either the manufacturer or from America or from Australia saying you need to change the fuel selector to one of these new ones. Right? So it's a recognised problem. So two tanks per wing, inboard and outboard, 84 gallons. Outboard tanks should always be filled first. All weight in excess of 3,112 pounds must be in fuel only. The 1979 Cherokee 6 went to a simpler 2-tank system with 94 pounds. And guess when all those funny, unexplained accidents stopped? The model, serious, I kid you not, it's a line like that. When they went to that 301 series, those fuel selection accidents, gone. Okay, there you go. Fuel burn, even those claimed it was economical with load, it's not what you'd call thrifty. Typical cruise speeds, about 14 to 17 gallons an hour. Powered back for maximum economy, you can burn as low as 11 or 12. I don't think everyone ever did that, but it's possible. Why is that important? Because first of all, it's about the load. You see in the top bit, it talks about the weight and the load. So when you talk about setting a thing like outboard tanks with fuel worse, why? Because then it runs into the main tanks, right? The second thing is the all weightings in excess of that must be in fuel only, right? Not in internal load, down to weight and balance, right? Now tell me, do you think that was ever obeyed by hardly anybody at all? Well, probably you two would be the only two in the world then. But I'm serious. The number of these accidents that talk about a lack of knowledge of the PIC to the weight and balance, including the fuel. Seriously. Okay. Heavily loaded, the aircraft demands attention, and especially if you load it wrongly. Talk about that in a minute. And how it can affect the performance, including fuel burn. Gee, some people don't trigger this idea that the more the weight you have, the more fuel you burn for the same performance. Now, isn't that revolutionary? You wouldn't think so reading these reports, I promise you. Okay. Owners strongly recommend seeking out an experienced CFI, then training at both ends of the weight and balance to learn how different it is. So if you're buying one, this is what you should do. This is owners generally who've had accidents who recommend this, not before they had the accident. Never precarious or dangerous, but trim requirements become vastly different depending on where your weight and balance is. So what is all this about? Okay. If you look at that and you see all this thing here, you see 14 to 1500 at maximum to clear a 50-foot obstacle at sea level, at reasonable density, things like that, right? Only 1,000 feet to do so on landing, yep. Fully loaded, people struggle to get that. The reason being because they're not familiar enough with the properties of the plane fully loaded. Now, you blokes will both tell me these things can take a bloody good load. Oh, yeah. But it depends on, eh? A lot of volume, yes. Here's the fuel selector that we talked about. So you've got the 5 positions in the old one. Off's there. Then you've got left, left, right, right. Should be fairly easy. Which ones do you use first?
Use the outboard first.
You would think that'd be logical, wouldn't you? Now, Benny Danica sent me a thing. His terminology, I loved it the way he said it. The fuel selector was always a bit loose and therefore easier to miss the detent. Now, that is a real understatement when you read the accident records about the number they found, even though it's selected on the first tank, is actually still off because it never got over the detent, right? Now, tell me, if you're taking off, you've got full tanks both sides, it's logical to go to the left tank first because it's the one click. That would be the logical. What does Piper say? Funnily enough, they say, on these, go to the right tank first. Yep. So even though we're brand new, they recognised there was a problem with the detent. In today's rules, the lawyers would have a field day with that. So anyway, and by the way, my good friend Warwick had he actually sent me a photo of it because I was having trouble finding a decent one. And he mentions it there. So Warwick, I got a lot of feedback from people when I started talking, people flying them and all that. And most experienced pilots love them. And I might leave it at that.
I thought they were great.
Hey, there you go. Most experienced pilots love them. You said the same, Warwick. Yep. There's another man who's flown them. You love them? Yep, there you go. As I said, this fuel selector thing was the subject of 30-something bits of information that says, if you've got an old one, change it. Simple as that. Another one is that I struggled with for a while is the fuel cap setup being flush to the top of the, right? What they found, and this comes up in these accidents out on farms and on particularly island strips, you'd be amazed at how many of these accidents happen on these island strips. Up there, down there, doesn't matter what island it was, someone managed to crash a Cherokee 6 on it. I'm serious. How do you get a Cherokee 6? Buy an island and wait for one to crash there. This is talking about the dust. They found dust in the tanks in a lot of these things, the ones that were operating out back or on that. And what it is you park there overnight, there's a windstorm, then there's a bit of moisture, the dust all hangs around. When you open it up, it all falls into the tank. Over a period of time, it builds up. Now, I know fuel filters take care of all this, don't they? Apparently not, because this was a CASA notification, or the predecessor, this is a DCA notification about
Beechcraft Awards.
Beechcraft Awards. Oh, there's a lot of things. I used to have a plane where the fuel caps were actually set well below the wing. Oh, no. Now, this is another extract from DCA once again, where they are looking at this fuel starvation, and they picked two types of aircraft. One of them obviously is the Cherokee 6, and the other one might have been mentioned already here, but what they talked about was exhaustion of fuel from the tank in use while ample fuel still aboard that. This is where the tanks don't run in each other. A Cessna 310, I think, might be one of them, is it? Where the tank doesn't run in, you have to select it and pump it. Is that the 310?
Oh, they had fuel transfer.
Yeah, transfer ones, yeah.
They would bring the
Yep.
fuel up from the
Yep.
the rear of the tank to the.
Now, is that,
to the-
or am I thinking of a twin Comanche?
Well, the
It was a flow through one. 310, was it? Yep, yep. Okay, so they had a lot of accidents there. Now, funnily, but this next one is so subtle, you wouldn't ever be, fail to observe fuel system operational limitations. This is where it says it's got 100 gallons in it, but only 90 are usable. Now, obviously, that's so difficult to understand. You can understand people running out of fuel like that. Yeah, not actually, that does exist. My little thing's 98, 92. It's 8 litres that you can't use. Mechanical malfunctions resulting in fuel. This doesn't come up at all apart from the fuel selector. But fuel pumps, things like that, I can't find a single accident for a PA32 where something like the fuel pumps fail.
I had one.
There you go. I now heard of one.
I did crash.
Yeah.
I landed the aircraft on this.
Is that your fuel pump failed?
Yeah, I
Yep.
was on takeoff. I was doing a test flight in the Cherokee 6 out of Darwin, Mike Alpha Romeo.
Yep.
One of the early ones. And at 400 feet, the engine failed.
It's a nice spot.
And I landed ahead.
Yeah.
I was doing a test flight. I landed ahead on the beach.
Yeah.
And they came in and put a new fuel control unit on.
Be interested to find out whether that actually ended up in a report that's in the database.
What's the crash?
Yeah, there you go, once again.
An off-field landing.
And I fell. By the way, the next one, the incorrect positioning of the fuel selector valve is not only a PA32 problem, it comes up in a lot of aircraft. And the more you start digging into it, the more times you find, I mean, Cessna 172 is probably the easiest fuel selector in the world, but the number of people who manage to get that wrong and have forced landings, yeah, that's amazing. Contamination fuel system we mentioned, but the first of those factors account for 52% of the accidents in this group. So that's the exhaustion and failed. So what we're talking here is pure and simple pilot error, nothing to do with the plane, because the fuel selection thing comes later, right? Okay, so let's talk about what pilots write, right? On arrival in the circuit, the pilot assessed the conditions and approached the land into the wind on runway 04. When the nose wheel lowered on the runway, the aircraft veered to the right and did not respond to the application of left rudder. A go-round was initiated, but soon after becoming airborne, the aircraft rolled to the right until it reached a bank angle of 60 degrees. Now tell me, first reaction, the landing into the wind. Do you think there might have been a slight crosswind there somewhere? Just that fraction maybe? Didn't respond to a left rudder.
The only reason I think that is that we have asymmetric flaps.
Which should be very unusual, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. In fact, I can't find anywhere of that.
I've had it in Cessna, but
We're not in that. No, no. Okay, so he attempted to correct it, hit the left wing ping, ruptured, caught fire. Yeah, well, those things happen, you know. After exit, he sighted the windsock and indicated a wind direction of approximately 310, 35 knots.
Well,
04, 310, 35 knots. Obviously, the fault of the people who put in the windsock. They put it in the wrong place. Nothing, you couldn't conclude anything else, could you? Now, tell me, sorry, if you were the pilot reporting that, would you actually have written that? I don't think I would have. I would have been too embarrassed. Okay. Departed to West Sale full fuel tanks, intending to track over the mountains to Albury, unable to do so due to cloud cover. Decided to track via the Kilmore Gap if you know the Kilmore track, I'm not sure why anybody would choose that anyway, but anyway.
So many accidents. Normal gap.
Yep. At lower terrain. Now, he didn't specify what lower terrain he selected, but I would have said under the treetops would have probably been close. Aircraft flying through the gap, the engine suddenly stopped. Less than 1,000 feet, yeah, for sure. He changed the fuel tanks, turned on the electric fuel pump, unable to restart the engine, hit the trees. Yeah. Okay. No mechanical fault that could have contributed to engine fail. The engine had been starved of fuel. The right tip had been selected from when the aircraft took. You remember that's the pilot advice, use the right tank. Right? So
Yeah, but he had the tip.
it turns out he's on the tip tank and tip tank runs out after 60 minutes, exactly the time that tip tank's supposed to have,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And so he turns it over, he's at less than 1,000 feet, starts the electric pump. What's his chances of getting the engine started? Seriously.
Depends how much altitude you've got.
Yeah, well, less than 1,000 feet, I suspect, was probably less than 100 feet, but that's maybe exaggerating. So, I mean, significant factors, yeah. Forget about the weather. I mean, that had nothing to do with it.
Once you're airborne.
You change your tip tank, yep.
But-
But as you see these, right,
Right.
these people have read
Yeah.
this in a manual that says use it, the right-hand tip tank, because it's the furthest one away. So, yeah, all I'm dealing with is what I've read. Qualified and licensed, maintenance record, blah, blah. Airspeed indicator didn't comply with the provisions of that directive that had been out at that time for over 2 years. Right, this is the old first series, and there was a problem with the airspeed indicators. They said, put this new one in. They're very expensive, as you know. It didn't really, no pre-existing damage, etc. All up weight, apparently in the limits, except that the forward locker was 3 kilos more than it should have been. 3 kilos in 45 is pretty irrelevant. Weather not affected by turbulence, but during the en route descent to Merimbula, they got flutter in the fin rudder, which collapsed. Right? Fin struck the leading edge, fell to bits, crashed, everyone killed. It's probable that the indicated airspeed at the onset was in the order of 160, the indicated airspeed, right?
Yeah.
With a VNE 184. The trouble is, what was the problem with the original Speedos? They underread the buggery. So at 165, 170, could well. Now, the other bit that this didn't mention in any great deal was the weather conditions were a lot worse than they were more or less indicating there. Onset of bad weather, a lot of turbulence, a lot of bloody, you know. So this bloke decided to dive his way fast out of the weather. Okay, another one that I struggled a bit with what influence it had. Now, a lot of these accidents, if you read the whole database, happen on, as I said, dirt strips, farm strips, and particularly these strips on the islands. A lot of these aircraft are modified with this high lift nose gear, right? Keep the prop out of the dirt on the crappy straight. It's a pretty simple mod. And I tried to relate which ones that had accidents actually had the mods, and a significant number of them did. So for you blokes have flown these, have you flown anyone with a high nose? Yep. No, this is with the deliberately modified, but you're right, you're heading in the right direction. Okay, what do you know about loading on these things? So just remember those things, 2 different types. Okay, we go back to the technical crap. 6-seat, or if you use the rear luggage area, you can put a 7 small seat in there. 2 baggage areas, max 45 kilos in each. All right, 1 up in the front and 1 behind the passenger seat if you don't have the kid seat in there. All right. If you have an ordinary old load of 6 passengers at around about 70 kilos, that's allowing for a couple of women. Got 420, full fuel 280, means that you can actually only take 2 kgs of additional luggage. And what did it say before? That once you went over those limits, you could only take it in fuel, but you've already got full fuel load. Right? So you can't take that extra 32, no matter what. So here you've got 45 kg space there and 45 kg space there. You've got everything on board. So what's the very next thing you do? Fill particularly the one at the back. Put everyone's stuff in the back there, behind that back seat. all your luggage, all going out the islands, they've all got 73 bags each. Yeah, particularly women for some reason like to carry a lot of stuff out the islands. Now, interestingly, do you know how many actual full load analysis were done on all those accidents you saw there by CAHSA or anybody else? Do you know, would you like to have a guess at how many full load analysis and weight and balance analysis were done?
I read the bottom line.
Eh?
I read the bottom line. Fine.
Yeah, that's it. There it is. One. Serious. Now, knowing all that, do you think that that's a little bit overlooking some things? Now, what do you think if you did that and then fill that up with an unweighed amount of luggage? How much you reckon you'd fit behind that back seat? If you're flying 6 people out the islands, you wouldn't put anything, but I can tell you all these ones that bloody landed long and missed the runway altogether because they couldn't get the thing to stop and on the islands and out in the dirt strips, you can guarantee that they all had overweight in them because of the way when you read how they landed and the thing didn't want to stop. You can only suppose either that or the average of 70 kilos per passenger could be well wrong. I have no doubt that a lot of these aircraft that struggled, and also when you read the ones about taking off and having trouble getting up in the air, overloading, because they're all at ground, they're all at sea level. So it's not like you're 10,000 feet up in the air on a hot day. Now, the other thing that's sadly missing in every single one of these things is anything about ambient temperature. Anything about, apart from the one that mentioned weather specifically, there's nothing about hot days, cold days, or anything else. Okay, here's some actual statements once again. Written off at Cuba Beatty, hit the ground while attempting a go-around. Written off at Wadong, fuel exhaustion while low flying in poor conditions. Written off Rottnest Island, probably exceeded maximum crosswind. You've heard that one before. Warburg Island, engine fail after short descent ditched in water. None of these have any other explanation except for this. Ivanhoe struck trees doing a go-round after a long tailwind after a landing attempt. Repaired, this one was badly damaged at Chute Harbour. Fuel flow interruption on takeoff, no reason found. I reckon I could take a guess, but anyway. Written off near Finke, break up in flight from overspeeding due to pilot error. That's a different breakup to the other one, by the way. So this is what you get, these summaries from the old DCA. They're too big to read there, but you read them, and most of them you say, really? Are you sure? Bottom one down there, pilot decided to divert to a nearby aerodrome because fuel gauges indicated low. Shortly after commencing the diversion, the engine stopped. Well, bugger me, who would have thought? And you read, you know, as I say, if you want to get this when Peter sends it out, have a read on them, but I didn't want to take forever going through them. But weather briefing before departing Townsville. Now, Townsville never gets bad weather, we all know that. En route unsuitable for visual flight. After being entered with a clearance to enter Cairns control zone, no further transmission received, failed to arrive in Cairns, found at Bellenden Kerr range. Weather in the area at the time was recorded as a low cloud with heavy rain. You see it all the time. The point I'm trying to make here, have you seen anything apart from the suspect detent that they told them to fix in, and they did fix in the later models, by the way? When that T-series came out, it had a brand new fuel selector and only 2 tanks. Okay, what I've said is summary. I haven't got a lot of great conclusions here. I've got a lot of confusing data and a lot of more confusing reports, a lot of reports that I doubt the authenticity of. I would have loved more. If I hadn't got better reports, I could make better educated guesses. Questionable design matter, fuel selector, and possibly that fuel tank allowing leakage into the tanks. I would have thought more had it been water leaking in, but dust leaking in, I struggle a little bit to get that into an engine failure situation, given the fuel filters you got. But DCA said it was, so they would never have been wrong. Okay, 300 horsepower give an increase of 9 knots for an increase of 13 kilos. It appears that a lot of people didn't understand it was only 13 kilos. Early models had a really large lot of directives about these fuel tanks and fuel caps. Early models, we know a lot of the reason for the early models is about fuel selector. There's no doubt about that. It's very, very clear. Why did people have trouble with it? And they weren't necessarily, by the way, ones with a lot of hours on, interestingly enough. There were some that were almost brand new that they failed to find. And very few, in fact, one mentioned load and weight, loading and weight and balance. Islands, and unsealed runways. You can draw your own conclusions to that one, I think, in a lot of ways. Now, there wasn't a direct correspondent, any correlation direct between low experienced pilots. In fact, there's an argument that says the more experienced the pilots are bot private. Oh no, I don't know what a bot private is. I think it's both private and commercial. Yeah.
Both private.
You remember they talked about the idea of 360 hours and 3,600 hours being the worst accident periods for pilots. Because you just get cocky after 360 and at 3,600 you know everything. Right? And I suspect that may have some influence in that one. Crosswind limitations, yeah, as many as you like. Landing downwind or taking off downwind, yeah, as many as you like. Non-VFR, as many as you like. But that could be any aircraft. Why is the accident rate so much higher in the PA-32s for all those things than, say, equivalent Cessna, say 206 or 210, something like that? There's no correlation. The figures are chalk and cheese.
I would low experience. For a lot of pilots, it would be their first commercial job. And they're barely experienced.
Yep, a couple hundred hours. Probably around 360.
Yeah.
But they've probably been given a thorough endorsement. And because they're known to not have a lot, and they've probably been shown how to do things properly.
Yeah.
And they do it properly.
Yeah.
Guys a lot of times think, I'll just hop straight and do it.
I wouldn't like to suggest that there was anything untoward in any of that at all.
I really think it's the way you load them. It's the first aircraft that had a nose lock.
Yep,
Everyone is so used to loading from the front to the back.
yep,
If you can't do that in a Cherokee section, you're going to load.
evenly, yep.
You got to do your weight and balance.
If we had better data on what was in the plane when it crashed and where it was and all that, then you could, but I agree with you. I would, a lot of these ones where they had trouble takeoff, landing, things like that, and particularly the ones with that lifted nose were gear like that. If you got nothing in the nor in the back, how much influence will that have?
You can go the other way too. You can load
Exactly.
too much to the front, thinking that
Yeah.
you've got to lower the nose.
Yeah.
No. The other guy just popped up too much.
Now, you know about the theory, there's a well-known theory that all women understand, but very few men do. It's called the theory of the empty cupboard. If there's an empty space, then it can't be left until it is so full that not even a tissue paper will go in there. Right? Now, you're laughing, but you know it's true.
The other thing I
Now,
was going to
you
say-
think about that Noel Zocker.
The other thing I was going to say, that when you load a Cherokee 6, you got so much space in the Cherokee 6. You can
Yes.
only half fill the volume and you're overweight.
Tell me, you're running out the island, you run out in Hamilton, and you've got your 6 passengers, and they've all got their 3 suitcases each.
You can't take 6 passengers and all that. You can't do it.
But how many do you think would have actually happened like that?
To me, it's a 4x2.
And we're not now talking about the commercial pilots, we're talking about the amateur pilot. And he's got all his mates with him and their girlfriends, and they're going out for a disgustingly dirty weekend out on Hamilton, as we all did. But it's his own plane.
Ah.
Right. Amazing how many of these are not rented aircraft. And I didn't mention that before. I'm glad you brought it up because I would have forgotten. Yeah. So what changed? We mentioned before, turbocharging, big difference. We know that one. The different fuel control selector, different tankage, and the retractable undercarriage, I don't think hurt at all. The one thing, by the way, interesting, with all those retractables, there is not one accident I could find where somebody forgot to put the undercarriage down. It must be the only model of retractable aircraft ever built.
It's got a failsafe. It's got a failsafe. Remember the
I like the arrow.
Eh? Like the arrow, yeah. Oh, a sensor. That, yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that would explain that one. Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, that's why I couldn't find any accidents with that then. Good. And a good answer. Thank you. Okay. If we had better accident reports, we could determine the influence of these things with that. But the point of this is the accident reports that are coming out now are fewer, a lot fewer than what used to come out. Even though they were pretty scarce before, they're now almost non-existent for what we consider a serious accident. The other thing is the time delay in getting serious accident reports out now with AHSA. Most of us will be dead before the next one comes out. Just a fact of life. They're not interested in doing it, so they're not doing it. If it's a commercial aircraft, a Qantas or something, and it blows a tyre, they'll have 27 people on it tomorrow. But for the rest of us, no, not important. So I know some of you are expecting some answers. What I've tried to explain is why I can't give you any answers, because I don't, all I have I've got a data set that's ended up confusing me probably more and probably no less than what I started. But I found it interesting that you've got this huge statistical anomaly that nobody else seems to have bothered to pick up on. Now, if you're in New Zealand, let me tell you that both the Victor and the PA-32, their accident record is hideously worse. But it is for every other aircraft type that they fly in New Zealand. The worst is the Cessna 206 over there. Again, if you want to buy parts for a Cessna 206, just stand around, one of them will go crash close to you someday. Yeah. Why New Zealand? It's the territory they fly in. Yeah. I'm sorry, I don't know if anybody found that interesting or not. I found it interesting doing it, even though I would have liked more answers. It offends my investigative prowess in the mining industry to not have an answer.
Well, more comments from the floor too. I'll make a comment. I didn't fly Cherokee 6Airs a lot. Looking through my records, I see I've flown 6 of them.
Excuse me?
2 of them have crashed later, much later after I flew. And I see 1 got written off of the cyclone in Darwin.
Yeah.
So 3 out of the 6 that I flew ended up bringing one way or another.
You've seen actually a lot of the photos and stuff that come out of there, just how much those things have been thrown around. It's incredible. Mate.
Well, I was there at the time.
Oh, right. Well, you know exactly. Got any good photos your own?
It stopped me taking photos, actually. I was a keen photographer until the cyclone came.
Oh, okay.
No, it's-
Hey.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, sorry, mate, you were talking.
Giving an idea of what they can actually carry, I did one trip with a Cherokee 6 from Dubbo to St George in Queensland to take a band, 4 guys and their drums and their guitars and amplifiers and things like that. But I did do the sums to make sure it wasn't going to waste. It's amazing when you go in a Cherokee 6.
Unbelievable amount of space. The record I could, sorry,
Yeah.
the
right
unverified
with
record
the
that I could find was 8 pigs, full adult pigs. And the pilot. I didn't want to know any more than that. Oh, yeah. But they actually don't count because they're expendable cargo.
Any other comments or questions? No? Well, we might, right up there. Okay, thank you.
Again, if anybody wants that whole stuff, send me an email and I'll send you a memory stick with all the data. I don't know anybody needs to be bored that much, but there might be someone. If they contact Peter, oh,
Yeah. No further questions? Oh, yes, we have.
That's not a question, that's not a comment. With the Cherokee operation, I had extensive Cherokee 6 operation in the Northern Territory. Right from the early models, the 260s, right through to the retractables, to the Saratogas, and et cetera, et cetera. I found them an excellent airplane from a pilot's point of view, but you just could not do your sums. The weight and balance was probably the biggest problem with most pilots because no one was used to a nose locker unless you moved up into twins.
Yep.
And then you had to refer to your weight and balance to get it just right. For instance, to me, I put 4 cartons of beer in the nose locker and all the rest of the cartons of beer in the back. But you had to, because the Cherokee 6 fuselage was so large, it looked like you could load a hell of a lot into it, but you can't. You can't. And that's where most of people came unstuck, was in their weight and balance. The one thing I'd like to mention too, I saw a stat up there about the T-tail, the T-tail Cherokee 6. Now the T-tail was a derivative from the Arrow, which had a T-tail, which matched all the big jets that were flying around at the time. And it was great. You could walk around the airplane, and the Arrow flew quite well. But they stuck the T-tail on an extended fuselage on a Cherokee 6. And what happened is that the airflow from the prop wash would go under the T-tail, which meant the T-tail would bite or not bite. And I never found this out until I flew one nose heavy. I was doing an endorsement. I'd always flown it fully loaded with charter. And I said, there's nothing wrong with this aircraft. Everybody was complaining that the aircraft would suddenly jerk into the air and they'd go all over the place, or on landing, it would give out. And the whole reason was airflow over the empennage. And I only ever found it out once when I tried to demonstrate a landing to a student, and the bloody thing just gave out and landed.
The Piper Seminole was a bit like that, if I remember.
Exactly.
It's on the takeoff, the tail was either flying or it wasn't, and
That's
then
right.
it was suddenly was. Yes,
Yeah.
I do.
And
remember
if you
that.
weren't on the ball, that would be
You
a
could
problem.
you're surprised.
So the T-tail in the Cherokee 6 models was a failure. That's why the stat was so high, because I then banned a lot of people from using that particular T-tail model, and only the experienced pilots, which I had trained to manage it, would work. That was mostly me.
But you did mention there before about appropriate training. That comes up, oh, sorry,
Take away from anything.
that comes up a lot in the discussion that goes around these things that can't be recorded because people don't want it recorded, where they talk about very experienced pilots, but not on that aircraft type. You know, the conversion was 2.3 hours, you know, and some people might be able to do it, but most wouldn't, I suspect. Thanks.
I always insisted on full load checks and empty checks. For an endorsement.
I don't remember being endorsement Cherokee 60 because got in and flew it.
Didn't go to quality flying school.
Yeah, sorry, I think they went back to the conventional tail of the Saratoga. They did away with that T-tail.
Yeah.
And the legs sort of parallel at the same time. Saratoga. Difference was the wing shape. The Saratoga had the double tapered wing. Yeah. Very efficient.
Right, no other than the old slab that.
Oh, yeah, the old slap
Yeah.
plate wing. Yeah, okay.
The Hershey bar wing, they called it.
But I never thought it was an unsafe airplane. I thought the Cherokee 6 was fabulous. I thought there was more problems with 210s and 206s than Cherokee 6, and there's the stats.
As I say, I could pull out the stats for a 210 or a 206, and you'd be stunned at the difference. Unless you're in New Guinea,
More troubles.
and that doesn't count either.
Well, the 210 had a much higher crash rate.
No, the 206 in New Guinea is hideous.
Right.
But once again, if you could get the data, you would find that almost every one of them would be overloaded to death.
The 206 was
It's a great aircraft.
great aircraft,
Yeah.
great pilot aircraft, good bush aircraft.
Yep.
Uh,
But if you have people sitting on the floor in the back, and I have seen one with 2 children in the belly pack with my own eyes. Yeah. And if you do stupid things like that, you're going to crash an aircraft.
Absolutely. Okay.
Still no comments from out in Zoom land? Oh, well, we might wind it up there then, folks. Thanks for being with us. Thank you. Good night.
No, thanks. Fascinating evening.